there is a high level of integrity related to like how students perform on the STAR test, and it predicts how they'll perform on Cognia or other nationwide tests. We see, this year we saw a little bit more of a little bit higher scores for different groups on those tests. So these scores right here focus on students who are not performing well at this particular time. What I like about the STAR test too is that you can graph an individual student's performance. So that is data I know that you've seen for your child, and so we can use that just to see how they're doing and how they're doing relative to the previous testing. We give that one every fall, midwinter, and then again in the spring. We give it in the fall just so that we know what may have been lost over the summer. We see the biggest drops in students who don't read at all over summer vacation.
Yeah, that's not my kid's problem.
I know. So those are the scores that we see for Cognia in math, the students in the lower tier, and for math, and then ELA. And then the science test is only given at the 8th grade level and the 11th grade level, so that's why there's no data there. The rates of chronic absenteeism are something that we're focusing on. We've begun talking with Gifford Healthcare and the UVM Healthcare Network to talk about ways that those organizations can support us in getting our most chronically absent students in school, because those are numbers that we worry about. And then we also looked at the number of students accessing extensions. So those are the blocks of time when teachers might work on skill building and then also homework, like catch up and keep up with their peers.
Is that the callback period, or?
Nope, callback is different. So extension is a scheduled class, normally with the grade level instructor who can teach reading strategies in the ELA world, strategies for comprehension, writing strategies, and then skill building in math, as well as homework support if a student is falling behind. And we rely on those STAR scores to help us populate who needs to access that additional support. I think at the elementary level, they've been using Track My Progress, and so those are the scores we use to populate 7th grade extensions.
Okay, although I hear they're doing away with Track My Progress.
Yeah, I think they're moving to STAR, which one of the nice things about the STAR test when I was in the classroom, you can have the test compile the data in a variety of different ways. So if we look at callback, for example, the test might suggest that students were having struggles with like homonyms or homophones, words that sound the same but are spelled differently and mean different things. And so I could look across all of my 8th grade students, pull a list of all the kids struggling with that, and then I could call them for callback in a specialized group and just teach lessons related to that until it seemed like they got it.
That's handy.
It was super handy. And so that's just one really concrete example of how we could do that. I don't know if Track My Progress has that capacity. It likely does.
Yeah, you can go in and pull a bunch of different data.
Yep. And so I think that can be really helpful. So all of these data points are things that we have to pull together in order to create this plan.
I'm assuming ELL is English Language Learner?
Yes. Oh, and, all right, I printed the wrong thing.
So chronically absent 10%, so that's like 18 days per school year?
That, right, and at this point in time, it was 13 days or more.
13 days.
And I'm
Curious, how many kids are in each grade?
between 50 and 70.
Okay.
And I seem to have
I don't
printed
know how you
the
keep track of
blank,
everybody and your
the
brain
blank
names.
template, so this is not terribly useful.
Okay.
But, what this data showed us and the plan that I made, when we populate the larger document is that we still have work to do with getting more students on grade level or higher in math and ELA. So some of the things that we wrote for in that grant or that we'll request are additional support, having teachers access professional development around teaching, writing, reading, and math. And then when we look at the chronically absent student piece, that shows greater need for us to make connections with those families and work to get those students in school more frequently. Because we are fortunate in that we have a lot of resources in our school building, but if students aren't coming into school, they're not accessing the meals that we have and can provide. They're not accessing the mental health supports or the educational supports or, it's in sometimes the medical and dental care too, so.
So what is the process for, getting those kids help if they're not here?
Yeah, it's really challenging, and since the pandemic, it's become even more challenging. Just because as we see the increase in anxiety and depression and mental health concerns, some kids will develop really avoidant behavior around things that feel hard, like school. So we've tried a variety of strategies. We try, one thing that's been successful recently is we have, we think about where their connections are in the building, and we had, for example, a student who wasn't coming into school very frequently, and they had firm connections in our innovation center and our STEM program. And so I reached out to Nasser, the teacher there, and said, could you just make a phone call and say, here's what you're missing, we're excited to see you. So really leveraging those connections in order to try and get students into school. Sometimes if they miss a certain number of days, we might follow a truancy process and reach out to the Orange County State's attorney, and I just want to be clear that really we're looking for more resources, like how do we support the family in getting the student to come to school. So they often will communicate with the Restorative Justice Center and or Clara Martin, and start trying to figure out how we get the student to access school more frequently. So even though it's scary and it goes through the court system, it's not criminal, it's not, it's not about punishing somebody, it's about how do we leverage the resources of our community to get that child into school more frequently.
Is that because the county doesn't have a truancy officer and you have just started doing it through there?
Yeah, we used to work with Orange County related to that. I think school districts have to designate a truancy officer. One of the things that is really challenging is that I think that can feel even harder for families to have a police officer knock on the door. Even if it's a supportive, caring police officer who's invested in the community, that can be really scary. And so sometimes when we're dealing with anxiety and things like that, we have to really think about who the student is, who the family is, and what's going to be most effective to get that student back in school. So I think in some families, we've been told when we call that would be helpful, and then we can do that. But if it wouldn't be helpful and it's going to make them withdraw even more, then that's not the best strategy. It can get really complicated and
imagine. Yeah, it sounds rough.
Work with human beings is always variable based on the human beings you work with.
People are messy.
Yep, but that's what makes it interesting. So we're, again, writing into this grant that we need greater support around math and ELA. There are number 1 and 2 priorities, just because we know that they're foundational. I don't know if you've looked at your child's math homework or the Carnegie book, but it is really language dense. So if students are struggling to read, then math is gonna be hard. And if they struggle with math, then that makes the opportunities we have in the Innovation Center harder, it makes robotics harder, it just, those are the sort of underpinnings of all of these things that we do. Similar to that are social emotional needs, and we've really worked hard to move resources around, not to add positions or anything like that, but to think really thoughtfully when somebody chooses to go work someplace else or leave our district, like how are we serving our students with the positions within the school? So we have strengthened our social emotional supports and our behavior supports. Just our dean of students is someone who has a therapeutic background, who worked in our school system as a student assistance counselor for the last 25 years, and then made this transition. Just with the understanding that behavior is communication, and so the behaviors that we're seeing are related to a need, and how do we meet that need? So our approach is a little bit unique, but we've seen our discipline numbers go down, and I'm hopeful, that students are reporting to their families that they're able to, be focused on schoolwork more because there are fewer distractions.
So how did you strengthen it? I mean.
So previously, we had a co-principal model, and Katie and I relied on restorative justice, and we relied on what we knew how to do, sometimes just old-fashioned discipline models with restorative justice models, but both of us have an English and social studies background, and we became administrators through project-based learning and those sorts of things. So I would say that my alignment previously was that you build curriculum, help get students engaged in curriculum, and help them feel a sense of belonging in your classroom, and things will just sort of come along naturally. I think the pandemic made things much more complicated than that, and we're, working through a reset, and we're doing okay. I think we're gaining all the time, but we have more need to have people with behavioral health backgrounds doing that work, and, really able to have conversations with students about, how to react to situations and how they might modify their behavior. So not only are we relying on just, okay, so you did this silly thing and now you're going to do this, like a detention or whatever, we're also understanding that, 2 years ago, I don't know if you're aware, but we had a tremendous amount of vandalism in our building. And so our current dean of students worked really hard to put in place a community service program. So if a student is committing acts of vandalism, they might go out with him and, repair pieces of the building. The idea being that we're a school community and we're stewards of this building. And if you do something to harm this building, then when we figure out who did it, we're going to ask you to be a participant in repairing it. And that has led to, knock on wood, a dramatic reduction in the amount of vandalism that we're seeing. I mean, 2 years ago, occasionally we'd have something like a sink ripped off the wall. Well, there was a TikTok challenge where kids were supposed to rip things off the wall and put it in their backpack and take it home with them. And so that happened. And we would have to do some super sleuthing to figure that out. I think that in addition to the TikTok challenges that we're seeing at school more frequently be related to dance or singing songs and things like that, which is kind of fun and easier to deal with. We also have students really connecting doing the community service. I think feeling some ownership
Mhm.
for the building. We have students asking to, beautify spaces, make murals, contribute in more positive ways, and that's really exciting for me.
Yeah, and you must have talked about it today, my kid came home really excited about the mural thing that you guys have going on. He was trying to explain it to me where it was. The
Okay.
existing one, and then I hear you're put out a survey for.
I think that might have happened through a PBL. Yeah, but those things are exciting, and I think they make students feel excited about the spaces that they're in. I mean, you heard about it
Yeah,
from
and he doesn't talk
an
much,
8th grade,
so.
I was gonna say, right. That's exciting.
Yeah.
And so that's the sort of thing that we try to do, and also, this is just an anecdote from a couple years ago, but we had a student who we could see had a lot of struggle, but didn't really want to connect with any of our therapeutic supports. And, would get in trouble every couple weeks, and then I would assign him community service, and he would go work with the counselor who does community service. And, then he had a good run, and then the next thing I know, we end up with some food splattered all over the wall in a stairwell, and I went and reviewed video footage, cause it was so awful, it was a burrito.
Mm.
And this kiddo lobs the burrito, looks up at the camera. And so when I talked to them, I said, you can just ask to meet with Colin. You don't have to do this part. And I think that was the last act of vandalism, but he'll still connect from time to time with that person. So I think, sometimes it's hard to sit in an office and talk to a therapeutic support.
Mhm.
It's easier to go outside and rake and have a one-to-one conversation
Mhm.
while you're doing something that feels good. So those are the sorts of things that we've been working on, and I think they've gained momentum. And so, so sometimes there's conversation about, too much administration at the high school, et cetera. And I think maybe we should have named roles differently, I don't know, because we haven't added a position, but we have moved things around. When we look at the data and we identify needs, we try to figure out how we leverage what we have in order to serve the students as well as possible. So, so that's what I got about all of this. The other thing that we continually request, through the title grant, and which we put in again, is that, some of our STEM work, is covered through this grant. And what I love about it is that students who maybe don't perform as well in a traditional math science classroom really find that the things that they learn in their math and science classes can be applied in a hands-on manner in the Innovation Center. And so that connection to STEM is really important. And when we look at these science scores, they're significantly lower than I would like them to be. And so I think we need to continue that work, but also have the teachers in the Innovation Center really be overt about the connections between what students are learning in the classroom and what's happening there. I think if we tighten those connections a little bit more, it'll benefit our students.
So this grant that you all are applying for, that's through the Title I fund?
Yes, so it's the consolidated federal program.
Since it's super pertinent, I'm not sure if you have an answer yet. How are you guys handling the new requirements for Title I that the federal government just handed down?
Yeah, I think, still the AOE is still grappling with it, and we're getting messages that are, one way one day and another way the next day. What's most important to me is knowing who our students are and doing what we need to do to serve those students. So I'm waiting. I have a meeting tomorrow morning where we'll be talking about what's expected of us and how we manage that. So I don't really feel like I
You
have a
don't
great,
envy your
yeah,
position there.
no. And at this point in time, I think that title grants will remain. That's what
Mhm.
we're hearing so far. So we've done all of our homework and we have it all ready to submit. Yeah,
How much is
based
it,
on what we know right now.
how much is it asking for?
So it gets based on the thresholds that we reach, and my data, which is on this table, gets compiled with the elementary school data. So, Heather Lawler, our assistant superintendent, manages bringing all of that together and getting it submitted. And it's traditionally a pretty large chunk of money. It goes based on our free and reduced lunch levels, plus our performance data. There's a whole formula for it. So, if you have any more questions about that, we can look at the student engagement survey.
You're great at explaining things as you go along, so I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. I did teach for 16 years, middle school, so I'm also good at explaining the same thing in different ways. if you need
Very
to have
handy.
that happen, yeah. So we ended up using this survey, which is very similar to one that the Champlain Valley School District used. I went to some professional development with their team, and what I saw was really interesting. I think, one of the things we like to focus on is having students feel like they have voice, or giving them voice in their learning experience. So some of the things that feel most important are knowing that students are learning things that feel relevant to their lives. So that's what when I'm not in school, I often think or talk about ideas from my classes. We want students to be really excited about the things that they're learning. And I think, like your child came home and shared about a mural happening at school, that's exciting.
Mhm.
And so we want that number to go up. It seems like sometimes it dips. So we think the spring numbers are often lower than the fall numbers. I think kids get excited to come back to school,
Mhm.
but we'll see whether that continues.
Yeah, I was gonna ask what the difference between the two columns was.
Yeah, so S23 is spring 23 and F is fall 23. And then spring and fall. Yeah, my workload in school being manageable, I think one of the things we sometimes hear from really academically driven students is that they might not feel like there's enough challenge for them. So it's interesting to think about what the sweet spot is for that second number. My workload is manageable. We want it to be manageable, but we also don't want it to be so manageable that it's too easy,
It doesn't say on here, I'm assuming this is a 1 to 5.
Yes, so 3 or higher is positive to extremely positive, which is why we chose that number. So what I like is pairing my workload at school is manageable with I feel appropriately challenged by my learning experiences. And so that number at the most recent administration was 87% of kids felt that way. So then we go to homework, interest in the majority of classes that students are taking. We do see that number get higher as students move up through high school. So as they matriculate throughout their time here, it gets higher. Middle schoolers often give us the lowest scores because they have the most prescriptive schedules in the building, including state mandated PE, which some of them are resentful of and some of them love it. So it's very interesting. And again, I have choice in the classes I take to explore the learning I'm interested in. Those scores are higher at the high school level than middle school for the same reason. And then the skills and concepts I'm learning will help support me in future goals. We think about how to connect the learning that happens in the classroom to future goals. I think sometimes without people really overtly having a conversation with students about why what they're learning matters, they miss it because they're such concrete thinkers. And so that is something we're always working on. And then this second part, adult connection and voice, is really a big part of why we started giving this survey. We used to do this activity where at various times in the school year, we would have teachers put a dot by the name of students they felt strongly connected to. And then we had a conversation a couple years ago with students who had teachers who felt like they had strong connections with the student. And then it became clear to me that the student didn't feel like they had an adult in the building they felt connected to. And so we know that perception is reality. And so it felt like it was critically important to know that our students felt like they have a connection to at least one adult in the building. So if things are going badly for them, who can they reach out to? So 85% of our students say that there are staff members in the building who care about them, and that 75% believe their teachers take an effort to know them. 84% feel that the administration treats them fairly. 76% feels like the administration listens to understand their perspective, and 95% feel like they have at least one trusted adult that they can talk to if need be. So again, part of the reason why the survey isn't anonymous is so that we can look at that 5%, because it also asks like, identify your person. So students often will write in their advisor, they often will write in a teacher who just gets them. So what we do is take to the grade teams. If there's a student who isn't noting a connection, then we go to the grade teams and we, talk about who might reach out and try to make stronger connections. And then if the next time we give the survey, there's still no one, then we cycle back and think about how people can make those connections. I feel like my opinions are valued and I have an impact at school. I feel like that's an area that I think about a lot, and how we can engage students more thoroughly to get that number up, because 57% feels low, and we want our kids to feel more empowered than that. And so callback, you asked about that. Callback happens twice a week. I think at the middle level, it's a little different. They do integrated studies through callback, or teachers divide up students based on who owes which teacher what work. And so sometimes that can feel harder for students. At the high school level, it's really much more targeted. So teachers might look at who's doing well, who may need to retake a test, and then they call the students back. Students can also request through their advisor who they want to be with, so if there's a concept they're not understanding. And it gives them, they could have more time with that teacher, it gives them an extra opportunity to work in a smaller group with their teacher to understand things. It's also really important for students who may get sick or may miss some school time to start to make some things up with their teacher. And it gives our clubs the time to meet sometimes. There was one other key piece that I wanted to mention. So clubs meet during those times. We've had book groups meet during those times. Students can also sign up to go to the media center. So we do a variety of things, but they're essentially flexible blocks that help people meet their needs. And one of the goals related to executive function and through advisory is just helping students be able to learn to identify and prioritize what they need to do and how to use the time they have to get their needs met. So 90% of our students say that they use their callbacks well. 98% say that they have friends at school. 97% say that they have friends who treat them with kindness and respect. But 81% say that other people who aren't their friends treat them with kindness and respect. So one of the things we did in response to that number being lower than we like is the Dean of Students and I, as well as the middle school counselor, because a lot of the things that pull those numbers down are related to middle school. We pushed into all of the middle school advisories and did lessons around, you know, where the line is between joking and not funny. And making sure that they're not, you know, claiming they're joking, but really harassing other people. And I think that was helpful. Although right now in the spring with kids getting a lot more energy at this time of year, I'm thinking we may need to cycle back. So, you know, we also like to understand whether or not life feels manageable for students. Many of our older students have jobs, they have a lot going on, younger siblings to care for, so we like to know that they feel like things are manageable or not, and you know, how satisfied they feel with their lives. So we do ask those questions so that we can identify who might need a little bit of extra support. So that's all the data I brought.
A lot of good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. I think we try to use all of this to make good decisions. It's helpful. Do you have any questions related to this, or?
Not random one, like I have at least one adult I can talk to if I need help at 95%. Is there, I'm assuming, but maybe it's totally not the case, like a lot of overlap with that 5% and the truant, chronically truant kids, or is it more?
There may be. That's a really good question. I should look at that. That is something that I'm gonna write down. I just think that it bears looking into, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they're chronically truant, I think it does speak to the connection here at school. And so that it would be good when the data is new, to do a crosswalk between that and the truancy data. Because we'll give this again this spring. And we give it through advisory.
Spring.
I know,
Like,
I know. It's coming.
Those are large flakes out
Yeah.
there.
I'm just grateful that this April vacation has one day that says it'll be 60 degrees.
Ooh, that'll be nice.
That sounds dreamy right now.
I was driving just before coming here, and it's, you know, it's 35 and snowing, and there was a lady coming towards me in her car, and she had the window down and her arm dangling out. I think people are just done, and are just.
We're gonna make it be spring whether it feels like it or not.
Yes.
Crank the heat, roll the window down. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't know that we have anything more. I mean.